We have an all-star lineup for our next presentation. Doug Clements, who hosted STEMIEFest on Tuesday, and Julie Sarama, who hosted on Wednesday. Their seminar is titled Early Math, Surprisingly Important. A Q&A session will follow.
Dr. Doug Clements and Dr. Julie Sarama from the Marsico Institute at the University of Denver and the STEMI Center will now present Early Math, Surprisingly Important.
Hi, I'm Julie Sarama.
And I'm Doug Clements.
And we're going to talk to you today about early math and some things that you might find surprising.
For example, math is surprisingly predictive of later school success. Really early math. I mean from birth right through preschool. The large-scale research that looked at like all early reading skill, early math skill, attention, internalizing problems, externalizing problems, and all the rest, found mathematics was the most predictive of later school success. All of them are important, but math is particularly important.
And we know that children have surprising math potential. All children. They tend to be underestimated. And we know that they can learn really broad, complex math at a really young age. Let's watch this video of this child who is 4 at the time of this video was taken. I think she would be considered gifted, so maybe not typical, but yet we know from lots of videos that parents send us from all over the world that more typical than you'd think.
5.
Good. How do you know?
I know that 4 and 4 is 8. So when I think of 9, I know that there's one line. So if I take away 4, it's like take away 4 from 8. So if there's one more still here, I'll put the end on and it's 5.
And I think what's cool about that is not that she can figure out the answer, because kids can memorize answers, and really bright kids, twice exceptional kids can do that, just memory. But what we see with that little girl is that she's able to visualize the problem, see objects, and really figure it out in real time. We're seeing her little thought process. And what we've learned with our studies with lots of children and lots of situations is that if we give children time to really think about it and figure it out, almost all children are able to figure out complex math problems and love explaining it to you.
And so surprise number 1, it's predictive. Surprise number 2, kids are amazingly competent if given the chance to learn. Surprise number 3, let me show you a study first, and then I'll tell you about the surprise. They looked at entering kindergartners. They had just finished preschool, entering kindergartners, and they asked them a lot of tasks. And so one of the tasks was, can you count out or produce a set of 2, 5, 7? Julie, can you give me 9 marbles? That kind of thing. And the kids did amazingly well. Look at the high percentage of these are end of preschool, right? Beginning kindergarten kids could do that. But there was a surprising part of this study. That is, they asked 4 groups of teachers, caregivers, professional development people that work with those teachers, right, to predict what kids could do.
Yeah, these are children in daycare settings mostly. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And their predictions, as the numbers go up, their predictions go way down. Look at the last one. Some of them said 30% or 10%. But actually 80% could do it.
Right.
And in subtraction, it's even more. Here's what kids could do. It's lower, of course, their subtraction problems. But look at where the teachers thought, way down there. So the surprise is, it's a surprise to too many of us as educators how well kids can do if given the opportunity to learn.
And that's really what we're talking about today, mostly. Early in math, children need an opportunity. We do know a lot. We know from years and years of studies that one of the key ways to understand how children learn and to help caregivers do better math, teach math better with children, is by using learning trajectories.
So learning trajectories, we know about math and it's helped build standards, and we know about how kids develop, and that's helped us build assessments. And we know a little bit about teaching, and that's helped us build curriculum and teaching practices, right? Good teaching practices. But learning trajectories weaves those three areas of research and knowledge and the wisdom of expert practice from caregivers and daycare people and parents together, so that all these areas, what is the math, what are the levels of thinking, and what are the teaching practices?
That's really complex, Doug, and I think that we could break it down a little better for people. So what we know about learning trajectories, if you want to think about it this way, is there's a goal. And if you took this into be any other area, say physical development, it's pretty easy to think about a goal. So most people think about children they'd want their children to be able to sit up without assistance. And we know that when babies are born, they don't have the muscle tone to hold up their head. And eventually, though, they can build their core muscles and they can sit up unaided. So we know that there's a developmental progression that goes along just to getting to the point where they're able to sit up unaided. And we wouldn't call it instructional activities, but really there are things that we do as parents, as caregivers, that help children get to that point where they're sitting up unaided, where we prop them up for bits of time, where we hold them differently, where we give them opportunities on their back and on their belly to play, to build up those muscles so that they are ready to meet that developmental milestone, which is our goal. That's sort of normal. It's the way we try to help all children. The same thing can be said with math. If we want all kids to be able to count 20 objects eventually, how do we start? We teach them number words, but that's not enough. We teach them to point to objects, but that's not enough. We teach them to say the number when we point to objects. That's not there yet. Okay, we have to ask them how many so that they know that the last word tells how many. And we even have to say, can you hand me some? All these things are little steps along the way. And learning trajectories help parents, caregivers, and teachers watch their children, see how cool they are and how amazing they are and everything that they can do, and build on that so they do meet their goals.
Yeah, very good. So that you're saying those kind of steps or phases are these what we call a developmental progression. And even though it's called in our writings instructional activities, it includes everything, right?
Right.
It's caregiving. It's setting up the good environment.
Right.
It's offering help when needed. And then sometimes it's actually, counting with the kid or something like that in an active way. Because when we know how to differentiate instruction, so important, especially for children with disabilities, we have to ask these three questions. Where are you trying to go? Where are you now? And how can you get there? Well, learning trajectories provide that information. Where are you trying to go is the learning trajectory's goal. Where are you now is the level of thinking along the mathematical learning trajectory. And what's the next level we can develop? And how can you get there? Are all these teaching practices.
Right. So when we hear from parents or caregivers, who they email us and they say, my child can do this. Mm-hmm. I want them to be able to do that. What do I do to help them to be able to do that? That's what we're really talking about with the instructional activities. And like you said, it could be something as simple as, hey, the next time you're setting out your snack, give the child 3 mm-hmm. and say, look, you have 3 goldfish on your plate. Just naming the number of goldfish is really going to build up that vocabulary.
Absolutely.
And those are the kind of conversations that we have with people all the time. Finally, we do know a lot about how to work with teachers and caregivers, and we have fancy research to show that the approach of learning trajectories works. We don't have to get into this, but everybody can see the learning trajectories bar is the biggest bar. And we've done these studies with thousands of teachers, and in general, the learning trajectories and working with a wide variety of caregivers, it helped all kids in all situations.
And it lasts for teachers too. And it also, kids learn literacy
Right.
as well, and language skills.
Because one thing we know that when we want to ask children, how do you know and how are you solving that, we're constantly talking and building their vocabulary. And so that high language, they call a high language math approach, is really helpful for kids developing language at all. So if you focus on math, you're not losing language. And in our study, when we went back and assessed children's language, children who had worked with this type of math intervention did much better. The math intervention we call building blocks is really just a learning trajectories approach.
Exactly. And this sustained for teachers too, right, Julie?
People who work with us like you doing it. Once you figure out that your job is to really look at how children learn and build on that, it's exciting. And so people keep doing it way after we stop away.
So here's in the fall, here's in the spring, and we were surprised when we went back as much as 6 years later that they got better.
Right.
Because they learned about children's thinking.
Right. Finally, before we go, we should tell you that we do have a website called Learning and Teaching with Learning Trajectories, in which all these learning trajectories are laid out for all kinds of topics. There's videos that show and explain what those developmental levels are, and there are instructional activities that help teachers get children to the next level. And there's more to come, right, Doug? There's
more to come, too. When you go into it, you can see the levels of thinking. You can pick different ages. Then you can see videos at each level of thinking. And you can also see videos of teachers, caregivers, and parents working with their kids,
right,
or just talking to their kids in everyday situations, right, and how that develops.
Again, some of our favorite videos are people just sending us videos they took on their cell phone, saying, "Look what Chloe did yesterday."
Mm-hmm.
Our niece Brianna sends videos of her children counting backwards and jumping off a stool, and they're just fantastic videos. But anybody at any time sends us videos, we look at it, we put it in a level of thinking, and it goes on the website so that we can explain how kids learn math to more and more people. And do you want to explain what is coming?
Yeah, so in LT Squared, why is it important for all children, especially children with disabilities? It is developmental.
Right.
You can always go down to a level of thinking that kid has mastered,
or
and that kid has strengths, and up if kids are twice exceptional, like you said. Very many times people think, oh, we won't bother them with math, but that's what they're particularly good at. And it's adaptable, right, Julie?
Right. And so the coming soon will be a place where we can click on and do different kinds of adaptations, because you know what the math activities aren't? They're not worksheets. They're not having children take a crayon and draw from a numeral 4 to a picture of 4 apples. This is really about hands-on activities, building, singing, all kinds of those things that can you do in an everyday environment.
We believe you should find the mathematics in kids' everyday play and pull the mathematics out of it, so kids have a chance to sing it or say it or whatever their strengths are for communicating about what they're thinking.
Exactly. We're going to play to children's strengths, because all we ever want to do is see what children can do. As we said, children are remarkable, and we have to take advantage of that and build their math better. So, build their math better. That's a great phrase.
And we hope to build math better with you in the future.
Now it's time for Q&A. Dr. Doug Clements and Julie Sarama from the Marsico Institute at the University of Denver and the STEMI Center will be answering questions about their presentation, Early Math, Surprisingly Important. Becky Chance is the moderator.
Thank you so much for sharing the importance of math in early childhood learning and explaining the learning trajectories and how those 3 core parts help children develop their mathematical skills along a developmental progression. Great resources. At this time, I'd like to go ahead and open up our Q&A session. So if you have a question for Dr. Sarama or Dr. Clements, please type it into the Q&A box below on your Zoom toolbar. And our first question is, why do you think this is an important approach? And why do you think it has benefits for children with disabilities?
Wow. Why is it an important approach? I'll probably leave to Doug, because, I think that Doug can, if you woke Doug up in the middle of the night and asked Doug why are learning trajectories important, he would be able to spout off a perfectly worded paragraph. And then I can talk about why I think they're particularly important in this context.
We hope that the presentation actually asked that question. The question might have been posed early on. In that, right, they build on the mathematics of children. So it's an asset-based approach, and for kids, no matter where they are in a learning progression, no matter if they're children with disabilities or twice exceptional or anything, you start where the children are and you build. Now, everybody seems to agree with we should build on, start where the kids are and teach them there. But if you don't know a learning trajectory, if you don't know what the direction is, what the path is, how do you recognize where you are? And how do you recognize where to go next? Julie's metaphor about crawling and standing and everything is a good one, about that people know those steps. But in mathematics, our learning trajectories and our learningtrajectories.org website help to provide that information. How about exceptional or twice exceptional kids too?
I think there's a couple things. Number one, there is a path, but the path goes all over the place, and the path is pretty wide because we know children kind of go. We're not pretending that kids go lockstep in a pattern. Even if we use the metaphor of children moving and we include all children, we know mobility looks really different for lots and lots of kids. Look at your average 8-month-old. Now you increase that to include all children. Wow, you have kids scooting, you have kids doing all kinds of things. So math is similar. What we can say is, in general, kids are going to do this before they do this. And knowing that helps you provide the right environment, ask the right questions, and do the right activities to help kids grow. The nice thing about the fact that makes them, because they're asset-based, they're developmentally appropriate for all kids. I used to work with a professional developer, and she said, who did math, and she said, the first thing that happens if somebody says to you, I'm a little lost, how do I get there? You say, well, where are you? You don't say, well, come to my house first, and then I'll tell you how to get there. Your first thing is to identify where are the children in their learning, in their growth, meeting them where they are and helping them excel. That also means looking ahead to children who just seem to, those kids that see numbers in their head, that are able to do quantity so quickly and do amazing things and amaze us, to be able to say, I'm going to meet that child where they are. And even if that's content is a little above what's normal, we're going to be able to meet them and provide challenges. And so I think the learning trajectories approach is perfect for use in all children, especially with teachers who are really working with a wide range of children.
How could we give children the chance to learn when it comes to math?
Yeah. I think the first thing we have to do is recognize that children start learning math as infants, that were born with sensitivities to number. We recently were visiting a relative who has a 8-month-old grandson, and said, I don't know, when I should start talking to you guys about math. And I said, here goes Doug. And Doug, what do you want to say about infants and their sensitivity?
It's just so fascinating, right? They do what's called habituation paradigm studies. All that means is that they show somebody something that stays the same, but changes along different things. Like they show them 3 red dots and then 3 blue stars in a different arrangement. And they keep changing and changing, but keep the number the same. Eventually, infants, 2 months of age and up to 6, 8 months, all are sensitive in this way. We'll get the infant version aboard. They'll start looking around. They're not as interested anymore. They've seen these pictures. Then they change the number to 2 instead of 3. They perk right up. Their eyes are back on the screen. Oh, that's interesting. Something else changed. We know that they're sensitive to number from the earliest months of life.
Yeah. So, and he honestly said that at brunch with this relative who has this 8-month-old grandson.
I went into more detail.
A little more detail, but the key is recognizing that children are already sensitive to quantity helps you understand that there's so little there's little things that you can do to help. So for example, because babies are sensitive to quantity, simply using lots of number words when you're talking to them is helpful. And I don't mean just saying 2, 3, 4, 5 just for fun. But if you're going to hand them 2 crackers, say, here's 2 crackers. If you're going to, if there are 3 people at the table, and say, oh, there are the 3 cups. Here are the 3 plates. Here are the 3 forks. Repetition, like any kind of vocabulary learning, is incredibly helpful, but also multiple representations. There are the 3 cups, or some kids have a way easier time saying there are the 3 cups. It's way easier for kids' fingers to do that. You really want to be able to instill your everyday language with quantity.
Multiple representations help understanding grow. Yep. But they also serve to be universal design for learning, because when you represent things multiple ways, children with disabilities who may have an into certain ways of representing the ideas have those opportunities, even if they don't have the ability to represent it in an auditory way or something.
Likewise, thinking about math as more than number is really important. So one thing that we address in our learning trajectories is mathematical learning in a variety of topics: patterning, shape, spatial reasoning, measurement. And so if you think about all those areas of math, you're also going to be more inclusive. More children have ways in, because some children really get jazzed about shapes. I mean, they learn all these shapes names before they should. But they just see shapes everywhere.
And beyond that, right? They see how shapes combine, right, for instance. Right. So it's not just naming a shape. It's that kid who came out of that 3-year-old preschool and told his mom, this whole walk is filled with hexagons because they fit together so well.
Right. And there was a 2-year-old who went for his checkup and pointed out shapes in the doctor's office in front of the doctor, and the doctor was, what's going on? It just, the kids can amaze us. And so giving children an opportunity, or I shouldn't say, opening our own eyes to what children are able to do is our way into math for all kids.
Can you talk a little bit more about how learning trajectories work with different curriculum?
Sure. So that's a great question by Alyssa, a good friend and colleague of ours. We have in the past, right, built curriculum using learning trajectories. That's great. But I think Alyssa's saying, can you use learning trajectories if you already have a curriculum? Absolutely. So the point is to understand kids' thinking. The point is to skip the unit on counting to 5 if your kids are counting to 10 or 15. Be aware of where kids are. Don't follow any curriculum if it's not serving kids' needs. Enhance that curriculum as necessary, but start with your knowledge of the mathematics and where children are along a developmental progression, and then adapt the curriculum for not just children with disabilities, right? For every kid in your class.
So let me give you an example. So say there is an activity in a curriculum that simply says, I don't know, what's a standard one? Have children put spots on a ladybug. I think that
is so classic, yeah.
I think that's in so many. So they have a little cutout of a ladybug, and they have some circles, and they're going to glue the circles on the ladybug, and the caregiver, teacher, whatever, says, okay, put 5 spots on the ladybug or 3 spots on the ladybug, whatever it is. So as a person who's understanding learning trajectories, you have your goal, which is we want children to be able to put a certain quantity on the ladybugs. But you're also watching where the children are. If some children can't yet count, and it gets a little complex, but understand that 5, if I say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that I know that there means there are 5 objects. If they're not there yet, and we can learn more by going to the Learning Trajectories website to really understand that, then it doesn't make sense to ask them to put out 5. However, you can put out 3 on yours and say, make yours like mine. And then you are meeting the child where they are, where they're able to non-verbally, so they might not know the number words, they might not be able to point and keep correspondence between the number word and the object,
But they recognize the arrangement.
They recognize the arrangement.
As a quantity, not just as one set arrangement, like you said with the fingers. They recognize these arrangements, even though they look different.
Right. And so the teacher is able to change the tasks just slightly to meet the needs of her children. Likewise, if she notices one child goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, done. Well, with a learning trajectories approach, the next step would be, excellent. Can you put 11 on? Going up to that next level of the learning trajectory.
I got a big mama ladybug.
Right.
Twice as big. Needs 10 spots.
Yeah. So it's just different ways of differentiating because of your understanding of children's learning.
Could you share some of the instructional strategies that your intervention study designed for teachers to carry out and for students to do?
Sure. Not absolutely sure what it means. Clearly, when we say use formative assessment, it is an instructional strategy. But I think the person might mean, and just put it in the chat, put it in Q&A if I got it wrong, and we'll go at it again. How do we teach this stuff? And this brings up an interesting thing. Up to now in the conference, not that my feelings were hurt, but science and engineering got a lot more press when we talk about inquiry and exploration and the like, because for too many of us, because of our experiences, we think math is just right or wrong answers.
Right.
You just count the ladybug spots, you just get this. There's nothing there. The reason I brought up composition of shapes and that is you can build such interesting structures. But in number 2, another thing that child might have done with ladybugs is say, can you find all the ways you can put some spots on the top of the ladybug, some spots on the bottom, and always have 5?
Right.
So the kid can figure out 3 and 2 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, but they don't know that ahead of time. So they explore that stuff. I wonder if 5 and none on the top is okay. Is that a good way to do it? Math, and these are simple examples. It gets much more interesting than that if I expanded on it. Math is also an inquiry-based subject. So we start with a problem. Maybe you can pull me back to earth and tell me what instructional practices.
So I think that we do the first and foremost formative assessment. That is a really important part. We believe that math should be in the environment, but not only in the environment. So we do believe that setting up activities, and that just could be, like Doug said, a question. Can you build the tower higher? Can you finish a puzzle? Something like that is still a little bit that it doesn't 100% come from what the child would do directed, but it is clearly meant to capitalize on the children's interests. We use small group formative assessment, but we have whole group with songs and stories and puzzles, things like that kids can
marching and patterns and the like. Just makes marching around the classroom more fun, but it's still kind of movement activities, right? And to go back to maybe the beginning, where's exploration way before you have that? The first thing we do with math manipulatives is play, because the teacher has an opportunity to ask questions, watch what they do, talk about, why did you put those 2 there and then these 3 over here? And, because these 3 have 3 sides and these 3 all have 4 sides. Whoa, this kid is way beyond where I thought they were beginning preschool. So, this kind of play approach is also part of the exploration always.
Right. And if we're going to do a small group and we're going to do formative assessment and we're going to be based on play, then maybe 1 or 2 things that we'd want to do is watching children, knowing when you can move them forward and move them back. Obviously, it's straight differentiation. But just really simple for number, if we're going to go with 1 real concrete, is if you ask a child to do something with a certain number and they're struggling, first and foremost, go down to 1 or 2. If you go down to 1 or 2 objects, it's incredibly accessible to all children because they can see 1 or 2 without having to count. Mm-hmm. And so you can give them a way into any kind of any kind of activity with number.
I'll say one more thing if I could. Real
it's
quickly.
Doug and Julie pile.
Yeah,
we can't
exactly.
Stop any question.
Well, I'll stop here. But I think we should also emphasize the importance of games here.
Yeah.
It's incredibly important for kids to play games. Many of us might have played Parcheesi and Candyland and all these kind of things. Not so much more recently. We love technology when done right, but one thing technology has done not so well is to take away board games and card games in many homes. And so these kind of games, they're filled with math. Kids love them. This is more towards the age of 3s and up, for sure. Not the infants and toddlers are much more in the exploratory way we were talking about before. But when they become interested in those, they're very effective.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think, a couple of people are wondering, how does STEM help young children with severe and multiple disabilities, but more specifically in the math domain? Really, how are those learning trajectories important and how are they beneficial for children with disabilities?
Well, I think like we first said, is that learning trajectories are not about a standard way of teaching a curriculum where a caregiver, well, let's just go with really early care, where you're going to have a curriculum and you're going to follow it. And in August, you're going to do one thing. In September, you're going to do another thing. In October, you're going to do another thing. And you're pretty sure that all kids should be doing the same thing on the same day. And for most of us, we experienced that all the way through school, where if it was, October 15th, you were all doing page 26 and maybe 27 in a workbook. And the next day you turned it over and you did 28 and 29. So there was maybe lip service to differentiation, but not real differentiation, in the sense that if a child wasn't able to do page 26, they were maybe told to do something else. And we've experienced that with early caregivers who are also taking care of children with disabilities in inclusion classrooms.
There is so much need for some kids that we think, well, math can wait. But math is a general cognitive skill that's most predictive of later learning. And so all kids, especially, I would argue, children with disabilities, need developmentally appropriate, individually appropriate adaptation so they can engage in mathematics too.
Right. So the idea is with learning trajectories, you're not following a certain timeline. You're following the child. The child is leading you, and that's why it's most important for disabilities. But we also, in our learning trajectories, with the help of Becky and her team, are indeed adding in lots of different adaptations to make their activities even more accessible to more children.
I think we have time for one more. Great question. What are some ways we can support low-income parents to have confidence to encourage these types of experiences you're describing? So that, especially if they're not feeling safe about it themselves, how could they guide children, their own children?
Yes, sir. So, that's a big question. It's hard. I think we talked in the last panel. We were talking, and somebody said we have to first convince people that they are able to do that. And Doug said, but they also need the knowledge to be able to do that. But given the fact that I've worked with teachers of young children for a really long time, if it feels like it's too much, they just don't engage. Then no math happens. And there's plenty of studies that say like less than 2 minutes of math happens per day in most children in most settings. And that's not fair. That's not right based on what Doug had said. So I think first of all, saying you're doing math all the time and you don't even realize it would be big. And that what we're talking about for young children isn't school math. That would be huge as well.
That's so important.
So that can separate from what they are bringing to the table from their home lives to what they perceive as math, where you have to sit down and do worksheets.
Boring worksheets.
Right. We want it to be that they see the math that they're doing every day and that competent. But
we want to help them to see that as math.
And to see
not just that everything you do is already math. That
Right.
doesn't help kids learn the language of mathematics.
And to see the competence in their children.
Oh, yeah, you're good.
Because
one.
that makes them more confident as well. When they can see their children as learners, they start building on that. And that, again, was in another study, was their biggest driver. When teachers saw their children do better, they stayed with learning more about learning trajectories, even when it can be a little bit tough to really dig in and learn about children's development.
Well, quick shout out to our DU team, who's really Becky and Shannon especially, who not only are putting kind of UDL things and everything else into learningtrajectories.org, but when you ask about parents, there's also an enhanced parent section and resources that provide more resources than we can talk about today.
Right. Because we know a lot that low-income parents actually bring tons of math to the table. But the problem is they can't come from a school system that doesn't honor what they bring, and they were told to sort of leave that behind and focus on the white paper with the pencil, the number 2 pencil.
God forbid they teach them the wrong way to add columns of figures. Yeah.
And so if we go back, and if they would have been honored for what they did bring to school, they would have had a different experience. And so we want to break that cycle and really do much better with their own kids.
Commonly called funds of knowledge from every community that we try to incorporate.
Yep.
Great, thank you. We want to definitely thank Drs. Clements and Dr. Sarama for sharing all these great mathematical strategies with us. I know there was a couple of questions we didn't get to, but we will circle around and try and follow up on some of these questions that we were not able to get to due to time. Thanks again for joining us.